Chapter 1. The traditional view of Satan. The traditional understanding of Satan within Christian theology is both familiar and deeply rooted. It has been shaped over centuries through scripture, interpretation, doctrine, and cultural reinforcement. Within this framework, Satan is understood as a created being who fell from a position of righteousness, rebelling against God through pride and disobedience. This rebellion is commonly seen as the origin of evil, marking the moment when opposition to divine will first entered creation. In this view, Satan is not merely symbolic nor incidental. He is presented as a real and active adversary. His role is to deceive, to tempt, and to draw humanity away from righteousness. He is understood as one who stands in deliberate opposition to God's purposes, working to undermine truth and corrupt what God has established. This interpretation is supported by several passages that describe deception, temptation, and spiritual conflict. John 8:44. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar, and the father of it. Here, Satan is described as the father of lies, a being fundamentally associated with falsehood and deception. The language is strong and unambiguous. It portrays him not as neutral, but as actively opposed to truth. Similarly, in another passage, his role as a deceiver of humanity is reinforced. Revelation 12:9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. This description presents Satan as the ultimate deceiver, one whose influence extends across humanity. The scale of his activity further emphasizes his role as a central figure in opposition to God's purposes. In addition to deception, temptation is also attributed to him. One of the most well-known examples is found in the temptation of Christ. Matthew 4:1. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. In this account, Satan directly challenges Christ, presenting alternatives that attempt to divert him from his path. This reinforces the idea that Satan actively seeks to oppose and disrupt divine intention. Taken together, these passages form the foundation of the traditional view. They present Satan as a deceiver, a tempter, and an adversary. Over time, these elements have been brought together into a coherent narrative. A being created good becomes corrupted, rejects God, and establishes himself as the primary force of opposition. This view carries intuitive appeal. It provides a clear explanation for the existence of evil while preserving the goodness of God. Evil is not attributed to God, but to the rebellion of a created being. Responsibility is shifted away from divine authorship and placed on the misuse of free will. In this way, the moral structure of the universe appears to be maintained. God remains wholly good, while evil is explained as the result of created beings choosing to act against him. Yet, when examined more closely, this framework begins to raise questions. The first question concerns origin. If Satan was created by God, then the possibility of his rebellion must have existed within that creation. This does not necessarily mean that God caused the rebellion. However, it does suggest that the conditions under which such a rebellion could occur were present from the beginning. Was the emergence of evil an unintended consequence of creation, or was it somehow permitted within the structure that God established? The traditional view often answers this through the concept of free will. Satan, like humanity, is said to have been given the ability to choose. His rebellion is therefore understood as the misuse of that freedom. While this explanation provides a framework, it does not fully resolve the issue. It leaves open the question of why such a system exists in the first place, and why the potential for such a profound disruption was present within it. A second question arises when considering authority. If Satan is truly acting in opposition to God, then to what extent is that opposition effective? Is he operating independently, or is he still subject to God's authority? It is at this point that certain passages introduce a significant complication. In the Bible book of Job, Satan does not appear as a rogue agent acting outside of divine control. Instead, he is depicted in a setting that suggests structure, limitation, and accountability. Job 1:6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. This scene is striking. Satan is not depicted as excluded from God's presence, nor as operating in isolation. He appears among others and presents himself before God. The interaction that follows further develops this picture. Job 1:12. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put forth thine hand. Job 2:6. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. In these passages, Satan is given permission to act, but within clearly defined limits. He is allowed to affect Job's circumstances, yet he is explicitly restricted. He cannot harm Job beyond what is permitted. He cannot take his life. This portrayal introduces a significant observation within the traditional framework. Satan is active, but not independent. He opposes, but within limits. He acts, but under authority. This does not easily align with the image of a being operating entirely in defiance of God's will. Instead, it suggests a role that is more structured and constrained. A third question emerges when considering purpose. If Satan's role is purely destructive, then his continued existence presents a theological problem. Why would an all-powerful God allow such a being to persist indefinitely, influencing humanity toward deception and wrongdoing? Why not remove him entirely? The traditional answer again points to free will and testing. Satan's presence is said to provide a context in which human choices are made and faith is demonstrated. While this explanation carries weight, it also raises further questions. If Satan's presence serves a function, then his role may not be entirely arbitrary. It may be connected to a larger structure within which testing, choice, and judgment occur. At this point, the traditional understanding begins to show its limits. It provides a clear and compelling narrative, but it does not fully account for all scriptural evidence. Certain passages suggest independence and opposition, while others suggest limitation and control. These two elements do not sit easily together. If Satan is truly an adversary, then the nature of that adversarial role must be defined more precisely. Is it absolute, existing outside of God's control? Or is it conditional, operating within boundaries that are ultimately set by God? The distinction is critical. If Satan operates independently, then there exists within creation a force that is not fully governed by its creator. This would introduce a limitation on divine sovereignty. If, however, he operates within limits, then his role begins to appear less like independent rebellion and more like constrained opposition. It is at this point that the traditional understanding reaches its limits. Not because it is entirely incorrect, but because it may be incomplete. It accounts for the presence of evil, but not fully for its structure. It explains opposition, but not entirely its boundaries. This realization does not dismiss the traditional view, rather it invites deeper examination. For if Satan is not fully independent, then his role must be reconsidered. And if his role must be reconsidered, then the nature of opposition itself must be explored more carefully. It is this line of inquiry that leads forward.